G'day everyone. Welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, joined by my co-host, as always, Iowa Joe. Today, welcoming on the father of Pack to the Future pod, Brian Fonfara. Brian, how are you? It's always nice to be in the company of, kind of podcasting royalty here. How have you been? What's life been like since letting go of Pack to the Future and kind of focusing on your own stuff?
Well, it's going a lot better now that you call me royalty. I like that. I don't want to argue. No, things have been good. I miss being on the mic. Glad to be here today. I retired, if you will, for fatherhood, and now I have two little girls, and they are my life. And oh man, it's fun. So yeah, I've been happy.
Amazing.
Brian and I have a little bit of a history because when I originally tried to get into podcasting, he was one of those that stepped up and helped out a little bit with it. So there was a little birdie that kind of whispered in my ear saying, well, Brian's kind of itching to maybe guest star or guest spot on some shows. And I was like, well, I know the perfect way to get him back into it. So
there you go.
Amazing.
I don't know if I want to mention the little birdie's name because he seems to get a big head whenever we mention it. So,
So kind of every week we start the show, we kind of just like to see what's going around the NFL. Obviously, we're just about to emerge from the depths of the off season into training camp. But something I do want to kind of talk about here, guys, is this whole running back contract thing. It kind of seems like we're at a really tough spot in kind of the cycle of the NFL and contracts, and this really ties into like the rookie contracts and the NFL CBA. So the deadline for franchise tagged running backs to get a full extension has passed, and no one was extended, right? So like I said, we're in kind of this weird spot where running back value has never been lower. But, that doesn't mean that there's not extremely talented running backs in the league. I mean, where are you guys at as far as paying these guys and, their value in general?
Me personally, and this is kind of sad. I really hope Aaron Jones sticks around for a bit because I was looking at some of the numbers for the topics we're going to do later, and like him being our best running back of all time is totally not out of the question. But I'm fine with paying a running back still, but he's got to be an Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara type. Like, Christian McCaffrey is the king of it. Like, you can't just be a straight up runner. Like, you look at the fourth overall pick being spent on Zeke Elliott, and now he's not on that team anymore. Like, you can't just be a pure runner anymore and expect a 15-year career and to get paid. And it makes sense. Pure, just straight up runners are easy to find in the draft. So, yeah, you got to have value.
Yeah, they definitely have to be a special talent to be able to get that second and third contract. But I did catch a clip, and I thought it was interesting that J.C. Treader, who's the president of the NFLPA union, without actually coming out and saying it, said something like, I wouldn't be surprised to see players start, quote unquote, being injured without actually being injured when it comes to like the franchise tag and stuff like that. And I really thought that was interesting because, I can understand it. Running back is a player too, and they're some of the hardest working players on the team because there's so much of it that they have to do. It's not just running between the tackles. It's, you've got to learn pass protection. You got to learn, receiving and running, and you got to know the different gaps to hit. And it's just, there's a lot of work into it. So I'm not for faking injuries because we've all, as Packer fans, we've known, Martellus Bennett, who got his way to get his way out of Green Bay. So I'm not for it, but I can understand it when teams aren't valuing that position. They use them for 4 years and say, all right, we're done with you. Or we throw a non-guaranteed franchise tag on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like some of the things that I've been saying, and obviously the CBA was only just signed a couple of years ago, but people are really pushing for the rookie contract to be shortened to kind of help them with that, right? Because, like you said, you're getting someone who can run. They kind of they just run these guys into the ground, and a lot of the time they aren't extended, or sometimes they can even be released if they get an unfortunate injury early in their career. And it's a tough one because I guess the way that the game is played these days, running back is inherently less valuable, I guess, in terms of like how replaceable they are. But yeah, like I said at the top, that doesn't mean they're any less skilled, and they kind of fill a different role in today's NFL. You don't really see the bell cow back anymore. There's no guy really, even besides like Derrick Henry, who still wasn't really as big as someone like Adrian Peterson's back in the day. Like no one's really running the rock that much a year anymore. So it's a tough spot, and it's like if you had a kid who wanted to play in the NFL, you'd have a tough time letting them play running back, knowing what kind of awaits them, right?
Right. If you had a kid in the NFL, you'd want to put him on like the offensive line or as a quarterback, because those are the two positions that seem to be able to last longer in the league than any other position. Brian, I know you got a couple of kids. What are your if you had to get them going to train them to get in the NFL, where are you putting them?
Long snapper.
There you go.
You still get to retire a millionaire. The injuries for long snappers are non-existent. Like, I mean, seriously, like looking back, I mean, I'm nowhere near the size for it, but you just start snapping a ball when you're 12 and don't stop until you're 40. Boom, you just carved out a nice career.
Yeah, no kid. I didn't even think about that one.
In terms of longevity, they have to be up there. Hey, like even like kickers eventually kind of they lose their leg, but like if you're a long snapper, you could last a fair while out there.
Well, what was it? Rob Davis had or was it which one of them that went on to be like a Packer exec had like a 14-year career as a long snapper? Was it Rob
Davis? I think so.
Yeah, they just
that's what I was going to bring
up. So I didn't even think about that one, but yeah, you're still making a ton of money, and you don't have all this, and you don't even have to play the whole time. You go in for like maybe a dozen plays.
You do one thing. Yeah, that's it. On the subject of CBAs, though, the idea I used to float on the Pack to the Future podcast and would still just love to see is kind of the MLS model. And for those who don't follow soccer, MLS CBA allows for, I think it's now 2. They're called designated players. And what those players get paid don't count against the payroll. So like you could go pay Aaron Rodgers $40-50 million a year, Mahomes, 80-90 million, and it doesn't count. You have still all that cap space to pay people. And suddenly it's not that big of a deal to pay your running back. And if you've got a guy like Derrick Henry, who's not a huge asset in the passing game, you can afford to keep him around. I'd love to see something like that.
That would be interesting. And it would still allow for the salary cap to be there. I mean, it would start hurting like some of these teams that, let's just say the Packers the last few years, where they've had the top corner, the top tackle, the top this, and this. But it would have been a lot easier if you could have socked, Aaron's contract and I don't know, Bakhtiari's contract for not counting against the cap. That'd be interesting. I could go with it.
Yeah, I feel like if you had that rule, you'd probably have to limit it to no quarterbacks, because I feel like it'd probably be pretty easy to kind of sidestep a lot of stuff. But one of the ones that I saw that I thought was interesting is just pretty simple, just changing how the tag is calculated for running backs, and stopping teams from being able to tag players multiple years in a row, which I think is already like pretty fucked up. I mean, the whole like the Kirk Cousins thing, how many times he got tagged, and like the fact that you can play on the tag, not have a deal, get injured, and then get tagged again. It's just like it's pretty team friendly, we'll say.
I would be all for getting rid of the franchise tag period. I know it's easy to say you like it as a fan because it's so easy for just everyday fans to say, oh, we'll just tag him at the end of the year. We'll just tag him at the end of the year. but it's not
Mm-hmm.
that simple. But like you just brought up, Nick, these players that are getting multiple tags, and I would love to see the franchise tag just go. But I'd be down for Brian's suggestion, or I wouldn't want to completely do away with the salary cap, but I would like to see maybe like a baseball tiered salary cap
Mm-hmm.
that if you hit a certain threshold, then you've got to pay a certain luxury tax or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As long as we're stealing stuff from other leagues, what about the way the NBA, like you can do a sign and trade? Now, like we can't afford to sign this free agent, but if we send you Devontae Adams, you sign that free agent for us and send them our way, something like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways, and especially since trades are much more prominent in the NFL right now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think that could be fun. Just lean into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple things that they could do. I would even be for, and I know this is kind of a circular way to get to it, but I think the NFL really needs to have a minor league system like the NBA has now, and like, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like Major League Baseball, but to incorporate like the USFL or XFL or whatever as their minor league team. And then you could
Mm-hmm.
even do like trades like that, or that would allow you to keep some of your draft picks without it counting against your actual salary cap. You can say, all right, well, you need
Mm-hmm.
time. We're going to sign you to this contract, but we're going to put you down here for a while, and then if we got to call you up, then it kind of counts against our budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the NFL is kind of like softly doing that. I mean, perfect example is I forget his name, the Packers signing the Super Bowl, well, the USFL Bowl MVP as their
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
quarterback. But yeah, because they kind of are doing it, and there's a lot of teams who have players who either started or are like second stringers who are directly ripped from those leagues. It's just not an official affiliation. But I totally agree. I think there's no harm in getting more guys in the system, and especially at some of these positions where it's just always so dry, like offensive line. There's always a drought of offensive linemen in the NFL, and you can never have too many good like cornerbacks or anything like that. Special teamers. There's always use for bodies in the NFL. So I think, yeah, I think that I do agree.
Yeah, what is his last name? Is it? I saw somebody put up a picture of Mr. Magoo. So is it like McGlue or Magoo?
Like I thought it was like McGough, maybe.
I don't know. I know it's one of them odd sounding or spelling last names. Could it be
Yeah,
like
Alex
McGough?
McGough. Alex
McGough.
McGough.
Okay.
But yeah, no, definitely.
I know a lot of people. I saw, was it from Wisconsin Sports Heroics, that somebody had an article that one of the Green Bay Packers draft picks are already in jeopardy of his position, and it was all because they signed McGough and they said Sean Clifford's position. It's like, come on, guys, are we really that far into reaching into this? There's no. This is
I
like
always hated the offseason.
this is like the Kurt Benkert signing. I love Kurt to death, but
Yes.
he's not going to come in and be a Super Bowl MVP right away.
Right.
There's a reason why he's playing in the USFL. It's because he wasn't ready to step into the NFL.
I will say it is nice to see Jace succeeding as well. He was obviously the biggest offensive player for that team. And I was a massive believer in Jace, and it's kind of sad things didn't work out with the injury in his rookie season, and some of the kind of character issues or whatever that happened. But yeah, it's really nice to see him like succeeding.
Definitely, I was very high on Jace. There's actually audio from my old podcast where we watched the draft pick live, and we were very excited for that pick. And it's pretty, between, like you said, the injury, the kind of off the field stuff that he had a little bit, it's nice to see him succeed. And I'm hoping he can come back into the league and have a chance. I don't think he ever really had a fair shake at it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so what do you think? Should we jump into our topic for the day?
Absolutely. Unless anything you want to talk about, Brian, going around the NFL?
No, man, let's do it.
Brilliant. So cool. So we're going to kind of go through our all-time offensive 11 here. And so for the purpose of this exercise, we've kind of played with somewhere in between 11 personnel and 21 personnel. I personally don't have a fullback on my list, but I know I know that Joe's very keen on it. So why not start, Joe? Just run us through who your starting offensive 11 players, best of all time for the Packers.
All right, so like we were talking about before we started recording, I have a feeling a lot of us are going to have, or all three of us are going to have some similar things. So, and obviously my quarterback is going to be Bart Starr. You know, I love Aaron Rodgers and all that, and I think he's one of the greatest players that ever donned a Packers uniform, and I think he's one of the greatest players to ever play in the NFL. But I think Bart Starr was that complete leader. You know, the multiple championships. He was basically the guy that ran the offense for the Lombardi era teams, and he was the quintessential field general. So he was my guy. And then I'll real quick run through the rest of them. For running back, I had Amon Green. Fullback, I kind of cheated. This way, I could run my two back set. I put Jim Taylor as my fullback. Tight end, I had Paul Kaufman. My two receivers, I had Don Hudson and Donald Driver. And then my starting offensive line is Forrest Gregg, Jerry Kramer, Larry McCarron, Fuzzy Thurston, and Ken Riddickers.
All right. Well, something I will disclose as well. Being a younger person, my list is probably going to be a little bit biased towards the past 20 or 30 years.
That's fair.
But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to argue with some of these names. I mean, like I think we should go through it probably position by position just so we can all stay on the same page. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to argue against any of the big three quarterbacks.
Right.
Brian, where are you at on your list here?
It's got to be Aaron Rodgers for me. Like, we're talking the only competition he has for most talented quarterback of all time is Patrick Mahomes. And I think he's got to do it a little bit longer first. I mean, just look at the numbers. Like, he's got double the passing yards of Bart Starr. And I understand it's a different time, but you got to take some of that into account. We're talking like triple the touchdowns and fewer interceptions in just about twice as many games. Like, the dude completely changed the quarterback position. Not long after Peyton Manning had already changed the quarterback position so crazily.
Yeah.
Like, I know it ended in him being a freaking weirdo, but like, I don't know. He didn't
That's putting it mildly.
Any welfare systems or anything. So like, I don't know. I hope Jordan Love can retire with some dignity. But oh man, I think Rodgers is too talented, and he's got every single number on his side, except for the Super Bowl championships, which is the only reason that I don't dismiss a discussion about Bart Starr.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it is so fascinating that the Packers have three quarterbacks that in their own era could each be considered the GOAT, like, which is absolutely just mind blowing. You know, and obviously, you know, the whole cultural thing with Favre was such a big deal, and obviously Bart started doing it so early, also such a big deal, and you know, starting kind of the revolutionization of the offensive game. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Brian. I can't argue that lethal killer efficiency from Aaron Rodgers. You know, even aside from all, like, you know, the tricks and the cool, like, wow throws and the run and all stuff he can do outside of the pocket, just his mind and his accuracy and just like that, you know, the confidence to go for it in those big moments. And this, you know, because people, one of the big arguments I used to get with a lot of people is that, you know, Aaron Rodgers is like always super risk averse and he doesn't take risks. Like, that's not, like, it wasn't true though. I mean, obviously he was tentative towards the middle of the field, but it wasn't that he was afraid of making some of these throws on the outside. It's just that he was just so good that it seemed like he was like avoiding some of these throws, and he would, you know, it seemed like his interception total was just so artificially low. But if you watch some of those games, he's taking risks all the time. He's getting in these like tight windows, and it's just absolutely like mind boggling. I mean, you go back to that 2020 season and just the first game, man. I mean, that's like some of the most incredible quarterbacking you'll ever see from anyone in the history of the game. And he's just absolutely tearing through people. And, you know, again, he's like, you know, throwing it right next to defenders' heads. He's getting it in between the linebackers, and it's beautiful to watch when he's on. So, I have a tough time not picking Rodgers here as well.
And like I said, there's
remember a
no
lot of those
wrong
same
answer.
people. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, I remember a lot of the people that were criticizing him for being risk averse would also criticize him for certain throws that we look at as great throws, but they're like, oh, he just got lucky. Like the run the table year, he had this throw go right through the hands of a cornerback, right into the hands of, I want to say James Jones, for this long touchdown that nobody saw coming. And the next day, everybody, on Twitter running through their film and everything is like, oh, see, this really wasn't that good of a throw. I'm like, you can't have it both ways. Is he risk averse or is he too risky and getting lucky?
Right. And like I said, there's no wrong answer here. I just went more with the field general, and you guys went more on the talent side. So there's no wrong answer. I mean, even you could throw Brett Favre in there just based purely on his career. I mean, you can't say much about his outside of the game stuff, but just career wise, you could throw him in there. But yeah, I went more field general, and you guys went talent and stuff. I mean,
it's the same as when you debate like Rodgers versus Tom Brady, and like you look at the rings, and that's kind of all the argument you need. Like,
right?
You can win an argument just by saying, "Yeah, he won a bajillion of them." Like, show some respect. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
totally.
Little surprised nobody said Matt Flynn, but
surprised no one said Deshaun Kaiser. I mean, man, that game he started against the Bears.
If you grew up in the 80s, or maybe late 70s, you could have threw Lynn Dickey in there. I mean, come on now.
So, like, this next segment, do you want to get to wide receiver first or running back first?
Let's go ahead and do the running back, because I can slot the running back fullback in there. So go ahead with your guys', since I've already kind of mentioned mine.
Yeah. Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, I don't think there's any surprises. I didn't play the game and put Jim Taylor at fullback, so I just had to put him at running back. And then the numbers all speak for themselves.
Yeah,
I think Amon Green definitely deserves, at the very least, an honorable mention, just being the all-time yards leader. But then you look at Jim Taylor. In 15 more games, he had 27 more touchdowns. Like, that's absolutely insane. The man was on a different planet. Like, he is unbelievable. I just don't think there's a true debate there.
No, there's not. All right, Youngin, what's yours?
Who's Jim Taylor? No, yeah, I mean, look, it's like you said, for the same reasons, in an era where that is how you lived and how you died, I can't help but have such respect for those guys. I mean, yeah, I can't argue against Jim Taylor. Like you said, shout out to Amon Green. For me, being the young guy, I think it's really hard to sometimes recognize real greatness when you're kind of in the midst of it. And, granted, Aaron Jones has not been used as much as he probably should have been, whether that's because of injury or coaching. But, I mean, in terms of just raw efficiency, his numbers are mental. I think, I'm not sure if he still has it, but in like leading through the season, he had like over 5 yards per carry average. Even through those years where he was getting used less and some of the shoddy interior offensive lines, he's a guy that can do it all. I mean, really, he's the perfect modern running back in the NFL. Fantastic vision, great contact balance. He can catch. Obviously, he's a fantastic receiver. He can block, which is something that people don't always talk about, is that he's a fantastic blocker. And he's just he's such a perfect team guy as well. I mean, he really has the whole package. And I think if he was on a team that really wanted to ring his bell more often, I think he would have a lot larger numbers to kind of go with that. And you see it in some of these games where they do rely on him. I think of kind of that Kansas City game a few years ago. Pick and choose any Cowboys game you want where he destroys them. He's such an exciting, fun player, and he was probably the best player on our offense last year.
Yeah, And both of them are great. Obviously, Brian and I were thinking a little bit the same. I just kind of cheated the system a little bit. But I went Amon just because of, like Brian said, that he's the franchise's leading rusher. I think he still holds the record for the longest touchdown run for the Packers at like 99 yards or something like that. And
I remember that day.
What's that?
I remember that day. That was a big day.
Yeah, it was a great run. I mean, yeah, and to think that he was just kind of a cast off from Seattle. He was just this fumbling machine, and then he turned into the Packers' greatest, biggest asset for years. So it made sense for me to go like that. And then, like I said, I just cheated the system so I could put Jim Taylor. But in my mind, I have Lombardi as my coach, so we would be running the 2-back system with the Packers sweep going on. So you need your thunder and lightning, and what better thunder and lightning than getting Amon and Jim Taylor?
No kidding.
Oh boy, yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
I'm also just looking deeper at Aaron Jones's numbers now, and just like I alluded to, 3 more seasons here, and he might be our leading rusher.
Yeah.
On top of that, he's at 1,800 receiving yards for his career with 17 touchdowns. Like, the dude's got the numbers.
Yes.
And yeah, he is still at 5.1 yards per carry for his career.
Yeah,
that's good.
that's kind of like the magic number
we talked about earlier too.
Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think something that I do kind of want to talk about just briefly is like, the fact that I am younger, kind of looking at these younger players and whatever. I think it is also important to be like, it's like there is like also kind of a bias sometimes that comes with older players, and the kind of, like me and Joe talked about this a little while ago with like Jermichael Finley, right? And he was obviously quite talented and like physically gifted. But I think, it's a little bit misleading to act like he's like the best tight end of all time in Packers history. I think it's like not necessarily with you guys, but sometimes when you get into these discussions with people online, they're quite like hesitant to put any kind of recent players from the past 10 years on any of these lists. And obviously some positions that's for good reason, but I think it's also good to have the conversation about it as well.
No, there's no doubt, and there's nothing wrong with Aaron Jones. I mean, I love the guy. If I can, there we go. I love the guy to death. He's a great guy. His parents really did right by him. He's if you ever meet him, it's always yes sir or yes ma'am, or whatever your pronouns are, and it just he's very humble, but he shows up on the field, and Nick and I had this discussion all of last year throughout the games. It's like, when we were doing our over-unders, it was, is he going to get over under 5 carries in the next game? And it was just getting frustrating every time. But he's obviously one that would go on the list too. But beings we're doing our starting 11, there's just so much of a history for the Packers. I was even thinking about putting Canadeo on there just because he's, his numbers and being a Hall of Famer and all that for his era would have been a solid person to be putting at halfback.
Absolutely. So let's go into the wide receivers then, shall we? I think since I had 3 wide receivers, I'll start with my 3. I think it's hard to go past Hudson, obviously, number 1. It's kind of the reason that the position exists, and I think it's quite difficult to argue against him. Even when you look at the error, and if you adjust and compare those numbers, it's still like absolutely mind-boggling. After Hudson, I've gone for Sterling Sharp. And look, some of the other receivers who are around for a bit longer, I definitely have a valid case from that era. I just think, he's kind of like, he's one of, if not the biggest what if in NFL history when it comes to injuries. And, one of the only receivers ever to hold a triple crown as well in an era where he played against Jerry Rice.
Yeah.
I just think that he's such a crazy talented, specimen of a player, and it would be kind of a shame to not include him, even if it is kind of slightly on the more hypothetical side. And then I have to go for Devontae Adams. It was tough to not put Geordie on the list, as I'm a big Geordie fan, but I think the way that Devontae plays the modern game, I think he's kind of the perfect receiver. He can do everything. I mean, obviously he doesn't have the high end speed, but when it comes to technique, everyone knows his releases and his kind of lightning fast first step. I think he's just really is a good do it all kind of receiver for the modern game.
I'm kind of interested in seeing what Brian put down, because it's weird, or not weird, but it's interesting that you got the younger one putting more of your modern ones and stuff like that. So I'm kind of interested to see what Brian did with his.
Yeah, and mine might show like my exact age relative to you. So I obviously Don Hudson is in there. We all agree on that. I mean, he's our Hall of Famer. The numbers are there. There's no discussion. I mean, 99 touchdowns is 26 more receiving touchdowns than anyone else in our history. Like, you can't ignore that. So I chose two receivers with a shout out to Sterling Sharp and Devontae Adams as the two most talented we've ever had, like without question. And if Sterling Sharp doesn't get injured and if Devontae Adams doesn't get traded to Oakland, their numbers, especially Adams, would probably surpass absolutely everybody in just about every category. But I went with our all-time leading receiver, and that's Donald Driver.
That's fair.
Only one to eclipse 10,000 yards. Still, like, the touchdowns aren't quite there at 61 when you've got guys like Sharp and Adams both have more, but the guy was just there for so long. He did absolutely everything for so long. I couldn't leave him off the list. I think we got a pretty good mix here.
Yeah, I had to do a coin flip because I was either going to put Donald or I was going to put James Lofton. And I kept wavering back and forth on it. It was finally like, all right, well, Donald's the all-time leading receive yards guy, so I think I'm going to slot him. And him, just like Aaron Jones, is such a humble guy, a good guy, and all that. There was never any issues with him or anything like that. And for him to come out of basically nowhere, I mean, 7th round out of Alcorn State, and for him to come in and be what he was, he's an amazing player, and I'm glad he ended as a Packer. I'm kind of sad that it ended the way it did, because it was either you're going to retire or we're going to release you, and he felt like he could still play, but he promised that he would never play in another uniform other than Green Bay. I think he's even come out recently and said that Greg Jennings was actively recruiting him to Minnesota, and he just kept saying, no, I promised the fans I would never wear another uniform other than the Packers. And so I that kind of upset me that that's how he went out, but I am glad that he ended his career with the same team that he started with.
Absolutely.
As long as you brought up Lofton, man, I was looking at his numbers. He's only 500 yards behind Donald Driver, but had 70 fewer games, had 213 fewer receptions, and only 500 fewer yards. Like, man was a machine. If he had the touchdown numbers in there, look out.
Well, and he was a first rounder, wasn't he? He was one of the few first rounders the Packers have taken at wide receiver.
Let's see. Actually, no, he was the 127th overall pick.
Okay, I was thinking something else. But yeah, I mean...
No, I'm looking on the wrong line. I'm sorry. Ignore me. That was the wrong line. Hang on, let's see. I'll find this.
I suppose if I wanted to, I could look for it too.
Yep. He was you are right.
He was a first round pick, yeah.
Dyslexia. He was the 6th overall pick. Yep.
In 79, wasn't it? Or 78?
78. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was going to say there's only been like a handful of wide receivers the Packers have drafted in the first round, and he was one of the last ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean that just it was him, and then it was Lofton, and then there was like a long period, and then Javon Walker was next, and we haven't drafted one since in the first round. So I mean, when you see that kind of record the Packers have with wide receivers, you know they must have really loved that kid to take him in the first round.
No kidding.
Absolutely. Now, what do you guys have for a tight end here?
Well, since I cheated and put a fullback, I only have one tight end.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, same. And mine's the same as Joe's. It's Paul Kaufman.
Yeah.
Another situation where the stats just leap out at you much more than anybody else, and I didn't feel there was a choice.
Yeah.
The only other one that I was thinking was Bubba Franks, just because he kind of had a longevity with the Packers, because it seems like the Packers don't tend to have a long streak with their tight ends. So it came down between Kaufman and Franks, and I know Franks a little bit better because he was in the time that I was growing up, but stats, games played, everything else, you couldn't go wrong with Kaufman. But I'm waiting for the youngin to tell us what he got, because I'm interested in that one.
So Luke Musgrave. No, yeah, I mean, you guys are totally right.
There you go.
Kind of going through, everyone, because I always try hard to kind of like understand the older players here. But I can't look past Kaufman. I mean, like you said, Joe, Frank's definitely in consideration. But I mean, it's like you really have to make an argument, and you don't really have to make an argument with Kaufman. It's kind of, you have to disprove that he's the greatest, really. So, I can't argue with that. Now, in the next section, I will definitely be showing my age. This is the one that this is the offensive line as a whole I found so incredibly difficult. Because the Packers have a long, storied history of incredible lineman play, and it's like we're actually quite spoiled, especially on the interior. And also just because I didn't watch any of these guys play. I hear one of them on the radio quite often. The Packers radio, and doing the Packers videos for them. But I mean, seeing these guys play, it's a totally different story. And obviously, we've been in touch with Fred Thurston. He's kind of another guy who's on my list. But his grandfather's on my list. But again, I haven't seen many of these guys play. So look, I'll go through mine. My left tackle is Bakhtiari. At guard, I have Fuzzy Thurston. At center, I have either Jim Ringo, Larry McCarron. My other guard, I got Jerry Kramer, of course. And at my other tackle, I have Chad Clifton. So I have a feeling I'm probably about to get roasted a little bit here with your guys' choices. But I mean, go ahead.
No, really, I was thinking about putting. Now you kind of have Chad Clifton out of position if you have him at your right tackle.
Well, yeah.
But I was really considering putting him as a left tackle because he had a longevity, but he did have some injuries here or there. But you can really, with the offensive line, you could plug and play almost anybody because, like you said, there is a long history of offensive lineman play. But I don't think you can go wrong with a lot of the Lombardi era ones just because there's so many Hall of Famers out of that line that it's crazy.
Yeah,
but
it's pretty ridiculous.
But Brian, who you got?
Yeah. Mine was actually very, very close to yours, Nick. I also put Bakhtiari. Just his longevity, his protecting Aaron Rodgers' blind side all these years, coming on as a rookie, 4th rounder, I want to say, and jumping in. Fuzzy Thurston, Jim Ringo, and Jerry Kramer, 100% on board with those. for my right tackle, I also went pretty recent, and I went with Clifton's counterpart. I got Mark Tauscher in there.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, and I just looked this up because I was like, I thought I remembered something about him never getting called for a holding. There's an entire article on ESPN from 2005 about a holding call on Mark Tauscher because he was 6 years into his career and it was his first one, and it was kind of controversial. But yeah, there's a whole article about it.
I should read that. Oh my god.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, the Packers have had a long history of it, of bookend tackles. You know, Clifton and Tauscher, Bakhtiari, Bulaga. You know, going back to the Lombardi era with Fuzzy and not Fuzzy, Forrest Gregg and who was the other tackle? Not Jordan. Who was the other tackle on that team? But like I said, all Hall of Famers. But yeah, that's pretty crazy stat with Tauscher. Bakhtiari is a good pick. Had he not been injured for that long, I think he definitely would have been one that I threw him in there. But even his short amount of, or not really short, I mean, he's been around a while, but his time, he's been solid the whole time, but I went, this is another one where I kind of had to coin flip, and I just went through and I said, okay, who's played that position the longest? And I needed a left tackle specifically, and I was like, well, maybe Chad Clifton. And I was like, no, I'm going to represent the 80s a little bit and go Ken Rutgers, and that's who I went with. But other than that, the only different thing is I had my other tackle was Forrest Gregg, and just Hall of Famer, Lombardi era.
Yeah.
And as long as you brought up all of those bookend pairings, Bruce Wilkerson and Earl Dotson, the two guys that started for Super Bowl 31, that was a great pairing as well. So yeah, we have a rich history here.
Yeah. I mean, it was really tough to leave Forrest Gregg off my list. I kind of just want to get some recognition for the other eras here. But I mean, yeah, you're totally right, Joe. And it's like, that's kind of the beautiful thing, is that you can really slot in almost like anyone from any of these eras. And it's like, it's actually totally fine. I mean, I think some of these guys, like especially the interior, like, like Jerry Kramer, I would find it impossible to leave off any of these lists. But, even someone like, I think, like Corey Linsley, I mean, the guy missed like maybe 10 snaps in his whole career playing with the Packers, and there was a good period of time where he was arguably, if not the best center in the game as well. And then like longevity comes in with a lot of these guys, and like we have that as well. It's not like a couple bursts, a couple year burst of good play. It's like, these guys are just locked down the side for their entire career, and I don't really decline as well.
The only position that I found it hard was center, just because they're kind of like tight end. There was always like a revolving door there where even though we were getting good play out of guys, they didn't last long in the system. You think of Frankie Bag of Donuts, Frankie Winters, he really wasn't there tremendously long. He was there, I think, 5 years at the most, but he had played elsewhere before coming in. Linsley would have been a good pick. But you got to go with Larry McCarron. I mean, that one's just the longevity alone, games played, and just that wonky finger, man.
So iconic.
And of course, voice of the radio. I've always said that I could just listen to Larry and Wayne read the telephone book just because they make it great, and he's got great insight and everything else. But
and so something I kind of wanted
to
ask you.
What set it apart was.
Oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say what set me apart was Jim Ringo's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and that's what just then on my coin toss up. It was like I found the one thing that kind of set one person apart, and that was it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I'm kind of assuming that we all would have like Lombardi as our all-time coach. But something I kind of want to ask
Mhm.
you, and something I find quite interesting, is like the actual identity of a team. I think the Packers are one of the only teams in the league that have like a hardcore identity, like where we have a coaching tree that's spanning back 30 years now. Um, we
Mhm.
have elements of our culture, like we said, the strong offensive linemen, and these kind of things that, like, strong quarterback play, obviously. These kind of things are just inherent parts of the Packers culture. When it comes to like the offense, like, I mean, what things do you guys see as like very like Packersy things to have, or like certain concepts or plays, or just like certain things that you would expect to see from the Packers offense in general?
Wow.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Well, it's so hard to answer too, because
Yeah.
you want to say quarterback play, but we've only really
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
two major quarterbacks in our generation. And so
Mhm.
that one's a hard one to answer. And you'd want to say running backs, but that really stopped when the quarterback play took over.
Mhm.
Um
Ooh.
wow.
I mean, I first and foremost do go more to like the offensive line and running game. It's
Yeah.
been so important to this team for so long. Um, that's really tough. But we have guys. We go back to my childhood with guys like Dorsey Levens and Edgar
Yeah.
Bennett, and then um, we go then to Amon Green, and then Ryan Grant, and then I mean having Eddie Lacy in town. Like there's really only been a handful of seasons where our offensive line hasn't been really good or like legendarily good in my lifetime. It's just always been such a priority, and yeah, like you said, like all the names that you could bring up for best players to ever play on the offensive line, like there's way too many for me to say anything different. Like yeah, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best answer you can give, because, like I said, there's so many other things that you'd want to say, but it's hard to say because we've not had anything else. Like with the
Mm-hmm.
quarterbacks, we've had the two quarterbacks for 40 years pretty much. And, it would be different if we had, maybe just a handful of them in that time. But uh, offensive line, yeah. I mean, obviously, Brian and I are old enough that we've seen some really shitty offensive line play from the Packers, but it's not a constant. It's usually
Mm-hmm.
after a bunch of injuries have happened, or something like that. I mean, you got the Marshall Newhouse era and the Don Barclays, and the year Byron Bell was in there, and
Oh.
Oof, you're
stuff like
triggering me
that.
right now, man.
Grim.
But for every one of those, you have a Bulaga, or you have a
Mhm.
Bakhtiari, or a TJ Lang, and a Josh Sitton,
Yeah.
and guys like that. So yeah, the offensive line would have to be the identity, and it makes sense with the Packers because they're a cold weather team. And
Mm.
they always say that in the cold weather you win or lose in the trenches, and that's the Green Bay Packer way.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and yeah, like, again, you guys are totally right. It's still one of the teams in the league that builds from the inside out. They start in the offensive line there. Up until last year, Brian Gutekunst had drafted an offensive lineman or multiple in every single
Yep.
year of his tenure. Um, and every time there's been a great quarterback success, there's been great O-line success to follow with it. I would say like we've generally had quite a good running game, and even in years where we don't necessarily use it or rely on it, it's generally been quite good still. I would have a tough
Mhm.
time thinking of a year where we were like definitively bad at running the ball. Um, and outside of that, the only thing I can think of is just like this is generally an offense that plays up to its competition as well. I mean, you think about how many great defenses we've faced in the past, 10, 15, 20 years. I'd
Mhm.
say it feels like it's been quite rare that we've been truly shut down by a good defense. I mean, even as recently as this last year, the Eagles defense, we talked about this last week. But even with Jordan Love at quarterback, we still had a chance to win that game. But the Bills, even like the Packers, their offense shows up generally. I mean, it's like that year with the 2018 Bears. The undefeated Cardinals with literally nobody at receiver. These are all games in my recent memory, of course, but the Packers, they generally have been an offensive minded team, and they play up. They don't fall short in these big moments against hard teams.
But the 1 year where the running game wasn't the greatest, the defense led most of the way for the season, was the Super Bowl year.
I was just going to say that. It's nuts. That was the first place my mind went. I was like, I do remember a couple years where we couldn't run the ball. And one of them, oddly, was when we had Franklin and Lacey, and we just couldn't get up over like 2.5 or 3 yards per carry. It was bad. But then the other one was that Super Bowl year where all year it was nothing. And then James Starks explodes in the playoffs a little bit, but that was it. And then boom, Super Bowl.
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, they were pulling guys off of practice squads. What was the Dimitri Nance and there was one other guy, but then you had Brandon Jackson on the team who, while wasn't a great running back, was a solid receiving threat out of the backfield.
Great blocker.
Yeah, and and then like you said, James Starks coming on late, but he had started like the season on PUP or whatever because of an injury, and nobody knew what he could do, and he just exploded. But Ryan Grant went down early, and there was that year. I think of it all the time because nobody thought they were going to do anything, and they went all the way with it.
Yeah, I wasn't podcasting or blogging or anything at that point, but I was complaining to all my friends and family about Mike McCarthy that year. Like we were 3 or 4 weeks left in the season, and we just looked done and cooked. And like I was like, oh, okay, maybe we can keep him around. He did turn it around and got us to the playoffs, and then nobody saw us as the 6th seed going all the way through. That was amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a great team.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's why we follow it, right?
I think we could do a whole nother podcast. You can do this next time I'm on, and we'll just dedicate an hour to talking about running backs that everybody forgot about. Or just like the guys who are like the flash in the pans, like Sam Congato. And oh man,
hey, put some respect on that name. It's Dr. Sam Congato.
It's Doctor. It is Doctor. That's right.
Oh man, that would be fun.
It would.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back on, Brian. This was a lot of fun. Before we finish up, is there anything that you're working on or covering that you want to quickly talk about here?
No, man. It was just really awesome to get this opportunity. I'd been talking to the bird in Joe's ear a little bit about possibly joining him for an episode, but that's never gone anywhere. So yeah, I thought it was really cool to jump on this one. Definitely brings me back to the old days. I had a lot of fun doing this.
Gets the juices going again, doesn't it?
It does. And now only problem is I'm super hyped for the season now, and we've still got, what is it, 8 weeks, 9 weeks? I don't know.
Well, think about it this way.
Days.
We've only got a week before training camp, so that'll suffice for a little bit.
There you go. Give me something. I'll take something.
Something. Absolutely something. All right, guys. Well, as always, you can find us on Twitter. You can find Brian at PTTF_Brian, myself at NicholasGRGR, Joe at Iowa_Joe86, the podcast at Outback_Packers. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, rate us, all that good stuff wherever you listen to the podcast and find us. Until next time, we'll see you later.